Hello, my name is Gabriel Muro, and I am going to show you guys some of our spectroscopic observations that we got during the December 2020 total solar eclipse down in Argentina. Now, if you take a look at this spacecraft view from GO-16, you'll see that we got very lucky being in one of the few spots in southern Argentina that didn't have clouds. There's us down there. Now, the eclipse took place on the east side of the, or the dry side of the Andes Mountains, which is known for being very dusty and windy, although it is pretty high in elevation, and the conditions were quite good, all things considered, because the eclipse occurred very, very high in the sky in the Neuquen province. We were also fully portable, so even though we had windy conditions, no electricity, and we were just on the side of the road, things were quite fine, and you can see our conditions over here on the right side of the screen, which were a little difficult for people, not so difficult for the spectrometer. Now, visibility was pretty good. We had around 2 minutes of total apparent motion occurring in the sky, which is around 2 solar radii. Our spectrometer was able to capture both sides of the corona, the leading side where we got about 0.9 and the trailing side where we got about 0.8 solar radii. So we were able to scan both sides at rates very similar to diurnal rotation. You can see what we saw on the spectrometer and what we saw from the ground here in the videos. Now the spectrometer is a 3-channel device capturing iron 14, iron 10, and iron 11. We're going to be focusing just on iron 14 for this presentation, and we used 1.5-second exposures. Basically the light passes through a slit mirror, and the slit light bounces off of a dichroic beam splitter onto an Eschell grating, and then that Eschell grating shows us a very, very high diffraction order. In the case of iron 14, 40-second order, which allows for very, very high resolution spectra. So a lot of this work is doing calibration, since this is our own home-built device, and we do things like flat fields, sphere integrating spheres for fast calibrations and balancing out, I guess, camera inconsistencies in signal. Also convolution smoothing, which is good for getting rid of a lot of the noisy elements in the data. Calibrating the wavelengths using calibration lamps, and you've got my computer there, and off in the back you've got a little red neon light. And correcting some of the optical distortions which are inherent to diffraction gratings at high resolutions. So we did this with a bit of trigonometry, finding circle centers, and then correcting the rest of the data with respect to that center. So what we end up with is calibrated eclipse spectra here in green, and neon calibration in black, just showing kind of roughly where the wavelengths are occurring and what the signal actually looks like in the data. And then we check that data for Gaussian-like signatures, which are what we expect spectra to look like. And if we're successful, we'll see something like this within a given horizontal line, and that little moving arrow is what we're aiming for in this particular presentation, since we're looking for Doppler shifts. So shifting the whole Gaussian to the right or the left indicates some sort of shift in wavelength. So we align this with white light data from Miroslav Druckmeiler and Anders Moller. And what we see is that the leading side shows pretty smooth spatial signal transitions, just radially, over on the non-CME side, and over on the CME side, where you can see it a little bit on the right there, that funny curve. Near the base of the CME, we have very strong signal transitions, as well as near the equator, which is interesting because it's around 40 degrees away from the CME footprints there. Taking a better look at these Doppler shift measurements, we see the left side, the leading side, just has very little difference from centralized wavelength. It's pretty consistent with just solid body rotation rates, but the right side has very, very high rotation rates. So here's the left side with a little bit more detail and sigma error included. But the right side has velocities going anywhere from 150 kilometers per second in the opposite direction of rotation, down to the negative velocities, which is coming towards us, that's what we would expect, of over 200 kilometers per second near the CME footprint and also near the equator region. So quite a lot of motion that we detected there. Now we located the CME footprint by taking a look at AIA 131, processing it with multi-Gaussian realization. We found it at roughly 1419 universal time. and it was at a negative 50 degrees by negative 30 degrees from the subsolar point, and remember south is up, so in the southern hemisphere, south is up, that's what we captured. So I've reoriented it to match our data. Now, by the time you look at the same data at the time of the eclipse, around 2 hours later, we see no activity above the disk. Our spectrometer captured it though. And here's a little arrow here to help you see the footprints. Now, when we take a look at something like stereo, stereo did capture and entered in the database the CME an hour later after SDO at around 1512 universal time, and they estimated around 440 kilometers per second at 3 solar radii. But of course, if you look at the low corona, area where our spectrometer is capturing at the time of the eclipse, we see nothing at low corona. If you use running difference methods to enhance the images, we see a little bit of activity in the low corona, but still there's quite a big data gap in between 1 and 3 solar radii. So what I did was fill this data gap using a synthetic flux stroke model, CME, with parameters from our spectrometer, from SDO, and stereo, and built something like this, which looks pretty similar to what the spacecrafts and our ground-based images captured. It's nice because it's a model that's easily reorientable to other spacecraft, and that's pretty much it. I think I'm running low on time. So our eclipse spectra does fill the data gap from 1 to 2 solar radii, which is really useful. Since no spacecraft really covers this range, especially in spectral information, and the most interesting stuff that we found came from the low corona. And so total solar eclipses are an ideal environment for these novel new designs. I'll leave the rest of the conclusions up unsaid. And if you guys have any questions about the data we captured or our model for CME shape evolution, please feel free to ask. Thank you very much.